I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. In today's topic, we are going to talk about a tragic occurrence that occurred in Costa Rica in the year 2020, the case of Allison Pamela Bonilla Vasquez. This horrifying occurrence not only had a significant influence on the overall state of the nation, but it also captured the attention of people from all over the world. Cartagena, Costa Rica was the location where Allison Pamela Bonilla Vasquez made her first appearance in the world on November 7, 2001 during her birth. She was the only kid that her mother, Yandy Vasquez, ever had. She had no further children. Allison was welcomed into a family that was attentive to her needs and had a strong sense of community when she was growing up. Her grandmother and grandfather, Ramon and Marjorie, were also significant contributors to her growth and development. Her mother was the primary caregiver and supporter of her throughout her life. Azy Amara, her aunt, was another significant influence in her life back when she was a child. It was because of her regular time spent with Allison that she was able to make a big contribution to the nurturing environment in which she was brought up. However, the dynamic of Allison's familial position became more complex as a result of the absence of Allison's father, who left the family immediately after she was born. Yandy took on the task of raising Allison on her own because he made the decision to be with another woman who was pregnant at the time. Allison was born to Yandy. As a consequence of the fact that Allison was abandoned, a profound connection was established not just between her and her mother, but also with her grandparents and other members of her extended family. Despite the challenges that she had to be able to overcome, Allison's relatives thought of her as a pleasant, outgoing, and friendly young lady. Each and every member of her family held her in the highest regard, and the deep link that she shared with her mother served as the basis for her day-to-day existence. The abrupt passing of Allison was even more devastating for those who were close to her because of the fact that her positive attitude and strong familial ties were evident in every aspect of her life. This made the loss of Allison even more difficult to bear for those who were close to her. In the history of the world, the friendship that existed between Allison Pamela Bonilla Vasquez and her mother, Yandy Vasquez, was among the most close and personal relationships that could ever exist. They had a relationship that went beyond that of a typical mother and daughter. They were the best of friends who confided in each other and supported each other without any conditions attaching to it. As a result of Allison's thoughtfulness in presenting her mother with gifts on Father's Day, the special link that exists between Allison and her mother was brought to light. The goals that Allison has set for herself in her professional life are crystal clear, and she has a strong sense of direction from which to go. After finishing the 8th grade, she took the decision to stop attending school in order to pursue her passion in makeup and to further improve her talents by enrolling in specialized schools. She did this in order to pursue her interest in makeup. After Allison realized how important it was to become financially independent, she started creating cakes and various different kinds of sweets. The delicious concoctions that she made, which she earned by her labor, swiftly earned her a reputation in her town, and she gained that reputation very quickly. Even though she had a lot going on, she made the decision to pursue her education and eventually enrolled in night school when she was 18 years old. This was despite the fact that she had several other things going on. This is a demonstration of her dedication to bettering herself and assisting her mother with the financial responsibilities that she is carrying. The routine that Allison maintained on a daily basis was consistent and well established. The mornings and early afternoons of her life were spent with her mother before she began attending night school and before she became romantically involved with her lover, Harold Segura Solano. Her next stop was at the school after that. Due to the fact that she followed this schedule throughout the day, she experienced feelings of safety and comfort. On the morning of March 4th, 2020, Allison began her day by heading to the salon owned by her mother in order to receive a manicure and have a talk first thing in the morning. Immediately following that, she made a brief visit to the residence of her close friend Paula for a few minutes. After arriving at school, Allison discovered that her class had been canceled, despite the fact that they had left together for school. Allison was surprised to learn this news. She came to the conclusion that she would pay a visit to Harold, who lived in the area, and she spent the evening at his house, where she had dinner with her family. At approximately 8:15 p.m., Allison left Harold's residence, which signaled the beginning of a series of events that would soon attract the attention of the entire nation. These events would eventually capture the attention of the President of the United States. However, her family and friends were oblivious of the fact that this would be the very last time they would ever see her alive. This would be the beginning of the end for them. Allison Bonilla Vasquez's final communications, which took place on the evening of March 4th, 2020, after she had left Harold's apartment, were characterized by strong feelings of dread and terror. These communications took place while she was leaving Harold's residence. At 8:43 o'clock in the evening, she stepped off the bus in the vicinity of her home, and without delay, she informed both her mother and her boyfriend via text message that two males had followed her off the bus. The message was sent soon after she stepped off the bus. Allison did not show there when her mother came, despite the fact that her mother had made an effort to meet her halfway when she arrived. Allison's mother had made an effort to meet her halfway. In spite of the fact that her mother searched the area furiously, she was unable to find any trace of her daughter anywhere in the area. During the hours and days immediately following Allison's kidnapping, her family and friends launched a comprehensive search operation to locate her. In the aftermath of her disappearance, they went around the neighborhood, distributed posters, and made contact with anyone who might have seen her. The initial significant clues were discovered when the glasses that belonged to Allison were found in the grass around 1 mile away from her residence, and when her identity was found on a coffee plantation. Both of these events occurred simultaneously. The fact that both of the artifacts appeared to have been placed on purpose led to the conclusion that the investigators were being led astray by an individual who was attempting to deceive them. Despite the fact that these attempts and discoveries were made, Allison continued to be away, and as the search continued without her return, her family's most significant concerns became a reality. One of the most significant developments in the investigation into the disappearance of Allison Pamela Bonilla Vasquez occurred when the testimony of witnesses and the views of key individuals were taken into consideration. An individual who was riding a motorcycle and was considered to be one of the most key witnesses indicated that they observed a BMW with 2 doors and a wine-colored exterior in the neighborhood of the location where Allison was last seen. The owner of this particular automobile was identified as Nelson Sanchez Urania, according to the findings of the investigation. An additional witness who confirmed this sighting stated that Nelson's automobile was found in the vicinity on the night that Allison vanished. This information was provided by the witness who confirmed the sighting. Since their families had known each other for a considerable amount of time, Nelson Sanchez Urania was a well-known character in Allison's life. This was due to the fact that their families had known each other for a long time. Allison had sufficient contacts with him to have a minimal amount of faith in him, even if they were not really close friends who were particularly close to each other. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Nelson had sent Allison a number of messages on various social media platforms. Allison had received these communications. A number of peculiar inquiries concerning her feelings toward Nelson were included in these conversations. Although Allison had responded with civility and comfort, these talks seemed to be foreboding at this point. This was despite the fact that Allison had already responded. In light of the fact that the authorities believed Nelson to be the major suspect, they issued a search warrant for his property as well as his vehicle. One of the unpleasant things that was found on his phone as a result of the search was images that depicted the mistreatment of women. These images were among the things that were discovered. Following the revelation of this information, a gloomy portrait of Nelson's character and the possible motivations behind his acts presented itself. Additionally, it was found that Nelson's vehicle possessed an exceptionally high level of cleanliness, which was confirmed after additional scrutiny. Both the carpets and the upholstery had been recently polished, but the carpets were not present. The authorities found hair and traces of blood inside the vehicle, and it was later proven that the hair and blood belonged to Allison. The hair and blood were found in the vehicle. The significance of these finds lies in the fact that they provided evidence that Allison had been in Nelson's vehicle and had most likely been the target of some form of criminal action. In spite of the fact that the evidence was unambiguous and compelling, it took the police several months of monitoring before they were able to make an arrest of Nelson Sanchez Urania, even though the evidence was clear and convincing. Despite the fact that the evidence was clear and convincing, this was the situation that prevailed. In order to guarantee that he would not be able to flee, he was under constant monitoring, and each and every one of his activities was scrupulously recorded. This action was taken to guarantee that he would not be able to flee the situation. It was determined that there was a clear connection between the hair and blood samples and Allison through the utilization of forensic inquiry, which finally led to the discovery of the breakthrough. Nelson was ultimately taken into custody as a result of this, and he subsequently confessed to the crime when he was questioned following his detention that followed his arrest. For the purpose of bolstering the case and bringing Allison's family one step closer to eventually receiving justice, a substantial amount of evidence was gathered against him. This evidence helped to the strengthening of the case. The circumstance that he found himself in was this one, despite the fact that he later changed his mind about the words that he had said. In the course of the facts that emerged in relation to the case of Allison Pamela Bonilla Vasquez, Nelson Sanchez Urania eventually admitted to being the perpetrator of the heinous offense. This transpired as a consequence of a change in circumstances that seemed to be cause for concern. It was stated that he came across Allison while she was walking alone along a country road on the evening that she disappeared. This was something that was incorporated into the early version of his story. In order to take advantage of the fact that she was previously acquainted with him, Nelson offered to give her a ride. Due to the fact that she was already acquainted with him, she decided to accept his offer. For the reason that she was already acquainted with Nelson, the proposition that he made was successful. He did not take her home, but rather took her to a remote coffee estate, where he mercilessly tortured her. He did this instead of taking her home. Instead of taking her home, he performed this action. It was not possible for her to go back to her house. Because of this, he decided to carry out this deed rather than bring her back to his house. The fact that she was powerless to defend herself led him to reveal that he had physically assaulted her. After that, he brought her to his vehicle while she was being restrained. The act was carried out during the time that she was helpless to defend herself against his activities. According to Nelson, he was under the influence of illegal substances at the time of the incident, and he formed a connection between his actions and the fact that he was under the influence of drugs to a significant degree before the incident occurred. He disclosed the particulars of the manner in which he disposed of Allison's body, which included the act of throwing her off a cliff at the San Geronimo landfill in Cachi for the purpose of disposal. He also detailed the manner in which he disposed of Allison's body. The disclosure of this information occurred within the context of his confession. Immediately following the conclusion of the investigation into the location of Allison's remains, this dump would swiftly become the principal focus of the investigation. This would occur shortly after the investigation was completed. Despite the fact that Nelson Sanchez Urania had previously stated that he was guilty for the incident, he eventually changed his mind about his remark. This was the case despite the fact that he had taken responsibility for the incident. The police, he claimed, were the ones who coerced him into confessing, and he denied having any involvement in the disappearance and murder of Allison. He claimed that the police demanded his confession. Furthermore, he asserted that the authorities were the ones who coerced him into entering a confession. According to him, the authorities had coerced him into confessing so that they could get their hands on him by any means necessary. Despite the fact that this retreat brought about an increase in the complexity of the case, The information that was gathered during the investigation continued to point towards his guilt. The fact that the investigation was carried out did not change the reality that this was the situation. Over the course of several months, the hunt for Allison's remains was a grueling and time-consuming undertaking that took place. The search was conducted in an effort to locate her remains. Nelson indicated that the dump in San Geronimo was the spot where she had disposed of her remains, hence the authorities centered their attention on that particular location. It was the authorities who were responsible for conducting the inquiry into the garbage. Following an exhaustive search for Allison, a volunteer search team discovered pieces of a sneaker, human bones, and pieces of clothing that matched what she was wearing on the night she disappeared. All of these items were located after the search team performed an aggressive search for her. Following the conclusion of the search, each and every one of these items was recognized and located. The forensic experts who examined the bones arrived at the conclusion that they belonged to Allison Pamela Bonilla Vasquez after doing the analysis as described above. After conducting the investigation, the specialists came to this conclusion as a result of their findings. The application of forensic investigation allowed for the identification of the deceased person to be established with complete and utter confidence, despite the fact that the remains had been broken up and dispersed all over the dump. The situation was the same in spite of the fact that everything was dispersed in different places. In addition to this, it offered the mourning family of Allison a sense of closure that was not only profound but also bittersweet. The achievement of this was an important step toward the goal of ensuring that Allison receives justice. In addition, the discovery was a significant step toward supporting her family in seeking justice, which the discovery was a vital step toward. In light of the fact that the events that transpired in relation to the case of Allison Pamela Bonilla Vasquez inspired widespread talks about the significance of safety and justice, Costa Rica was left with a substantial imprint as a consequence of the events that took place. Not only did it bring to light the precarious circumstances in which young women find themselves, but it also brought to light the necessity of conducting investigations that are both swift and comprehensive in cases when there is a case of the disappearance or assault of a young woman. As a result of Nelson Sanchez Urania being arrested for the kidnapping and murder of Allison Pamela Bonilla Vasquez, the legal process became more complex and underwent substantial changes. This was due to the fact that Nelson Sanchez Urania was brought into jail. It was the first step that led to this happening, and it was the fact that Nelson Sanchez Urania was taken into jail. In the beginning, Nelson Sanchez Urania was given a sentence of 18 years in prison for the crimes that he did on Allison. As a consequence of the actions that he took against Allison, this sentence was handed down to him. Nelson's guilt was proven by an overwhelming amount of evidence, which was disclosed by the findings of the forensic investigation as well as Nelson's own confession, which he made under pressure. The findings of the inquiry established that Nelson was guilty. Following the verification of Nelson's conviction by the evidence, this penalty was handed down to him. The initial verdict, on the other hand, caused the community as well as the family of Allison to lose their composure, since they were of the idea that justice had not been carried out in its entirety by the time it was handed down. This was the case because the initial verdict was handed down. In the shortest amount of time feasible, the attorney who was representing Nelson's family submitted an appeal. The purpose of the appeal was to make a request for a more severe punishment that was in line with the gravity of the offenses that Nelson had committed. It was necessary to conduct a second trial since the appeal procedure was carried out. This was the result of the appeal process. In the course of this trial, the evidence and the events that were associated with the case were brought back under the microscope for further examination. During the retrial, additional witnesses and pieces of evidence were brought to light, which brought to light the seriousness of the crime as well as Nelson's lack of remorse for his behavior. This came to light the fact that Nelson never expressed any regret for his actions. The judge arrived at the conclusion that Nelson Sanchez Urania should be sentenced to a total of 35 years of incarceration after giving the matter a great deal of thought and care. However, despite the fact that they were able to obtain some degree of closure as a consequence of this eventual verdict, the family of Allison continued to grieve over the tragic loss of their loved one and to struggle for justice. Allison's family went through a period of time that was characterized by profound sadness and pain at the time that the processes that took place in court were being carried out. They remained resolute in their dedication to pursuing justice, appearing in court whenever it was necessary for them to do so, and advocating for Nelson Sanchez Urania to be sentenced to more harsh prison sentences. The fruits of their labor were well worth it, and they were successful in accomplishing their objectives. They fought justice for Allison with unwavering determination, which is evidence that they were able to persevere in the face of losses that were incomprehensible. With this determination, they pursued justice for Allison. The scenario that included Allison Pamela Bonilla Vasquez created a significant ripple effect across the society of Costa Rica, and it received a great deal of attention from the media as well as from other social networks. The risks that young women face were brought to light as a result of the attention that was given to them in the news, as was the urgent necessity for increased safety measures. There are several different social media sites that have become a venue where people can show their sympathy with Allison's family and demand accountability for gender-based violence. Memorial services and public marches were held in her honor by her family and allies in order to commemorate her life and advocate for the safe and secure treatment of women. The purpose of these gatherings was to honor Allison's memory. Through these gatherings, which served as very powerful reminders, the impact that violence has on families and communities was brought to light, and brought to light the impact that violence has. It was a chorus of words of support and calls for justice that resonated around the nation, pleading with the authorities to make the protection and safety of women and girls their first priority. Continuing to resound as a forceful emblem, the case of Allison Pamela Bonilla Vasquez continues to serve as a potent symbol of the fight against gender-based violence and the struggle for justice in Costa Rica and around the world. The legacy she leaves behind acts as a source of inspiration for maintaining efforts to construct a society that is both safer and more egalitarian for all members of society. Thank you for watching. I recommend our other crime videos.